Hi, I'm Felix, and this is the third video in my series Blender for Graphic Designers. If you haven't watched the previous videos, I would highly recommend you to do so. Anyways, this video will be focusing on materials and creating materials in Blender. Alright, to get started, we're just gonna set up a simple scene, again with a background plane and an imported design, and we're gonna add 1000 watts point light source, and we're gonna change the radius to get really nice definition in the surface that we're gonna take a look at now. And then we're gonna select our imported asset here, and we're gonna click on the shading tab. All right, so this is the shading mode, the shading tab. And as you see, it has a similar interface to the layout tab, but it is different by having additional windows here. And you can see here on the bottom already, there is a space for nodes. And this is how materials work in Blender. Basically, you have these nodes that you connect to each other to create complex materials. And so this is a really basic setup. Right here, you have your texture that we imported using our import images as planes. And this then is connected to the base color of a principled BSDF. It's a basic material that gives you a lot of options to fine-tune it, and in addition to that, it has its alpha channel, so the transparency connected to the alpha input of this principled BSDF, and the BSDF is then connected to the surface output of this material output node, and that makes the texture actually appear on your mesh. So we're gonna zoom in a little bit now and take a look at our material. So right now we switched from the rendered preview into the material preview, and we get this environment sphere that shows us reflections that our materials catch. And if we start adjusting the inputs of our principled BSDF, we can change the appearance of our texture on the mesh here and the material. So the two most important parameters to be familiar with are roughness and specular. So the roughness is just the like it says, the roughness of your surface. So the rougher it is, the more matte kind of an appearance you get, and the less rough it is, the more shiny it becomes. So if you turn roughness down to a value close to 0 and move around your preview, you see it's really, really shiny, really glossy. You get a lot of reflections going on. And if you turn it up really, really high, you see it becomes a lot more matte, and you pretty much lose all your reflections. So if you want to simulate paper, for example, a value around 0.85 for rough paper is a good value to start with, and then go from there. But of course you can simulate all different kinds of materials by starting to look at the roughness and adjusting that accordingly. And specular, the other important parameter is the way that the light diffuses on the surface. So if you turn up the specular parameter, you see there's a lot of light being cast over the surface. And if you turn the specular down, you get a much more defined highlight. And this is where you really need to look at the materials that you're trying to emulate and figure out what the right values are for that. So now we're going to take a look at how to simulate structure on the surface of our material. So we're gonna try to do something like a paper mock-up. And the way we're gonna do that is I'm going to patch together a couple of nodes, and then we're just gonna cut to that point, and I'm going to explain what these nodes do and show you the results. All right, we're back again. What I did is I created here a couple of nodes. First of all, a bump node, and I connected that to the normal input on our principled BSDF. And what that does is it simulates structure on the surface of a flat mesh, so we don't have any geometry going on here. Our card is still paper thin or even thinner than that. But by adding this bump node and connecting it to a noise texture, we get this crumply surface that is already interacting with the light in the environment surrounding our object here. And what I did to make it easier adjusting our noise in an appropriate manner, I used the Node Wrangler plugin, and by clicking or typing Control T, I added this texture coordinate mapping node setup. And now we can go ahead and start tweaking our noise texture to achieve a paper-like look. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put the scale to about 30. So as you see, we get a more fine structure on our surface. We're gonna turn up the detail a little bit, and also the roughness, not too much. And then we're gonna go ahead and scale our texture to make it a little distorted, because if you take a close look at rough natural paper stock, you have this kind of a direction that you can see of the paper, of the fibers in the paper. And to simulate that, we're gonna scale our texture along the X and Y axes. And this is where you really have to start looking at the result that you get in your preview and seeing whether that is appropriate to what you try to achieve. All right, so this is the general direction I want to go with this material, but right now the surface appears to be really, really rough, and that is because we have the strength of our bump set to 1, so that is the most pronounced setting that you have for this node, and we're gonna turn that down to maybe around 0.2. And now you see the structure much more subtle. It's actually really hard to see, but that's a good thing right now. And we're gonna now switch back to the rendered mode here and look at an actual preview. All right, and that does look pretty convincing to me. It's still super glossy, so I'm gonna move the roughness up quite a bit again. And then to counteract that, I'm gonna give it a little more strength, maybe 0.25. Oh, that might have been too much, 0.22. All right, that looks nice. All right, and there we go. this is pretty much how we can create a paper structure. And of course, if you show an object like that from afar, it only adds a little bit of noise, a little bit of detail, but it still shows in the way your renders turn out. But one thing you can do to really accentuate this structure that we now created is using the camera to really capture that, combined with a good lighting setup. And that's what we'll be focusing on in the next video.